When it comes to video games, there is one term that I'm sure everyone has heard, and that's immersion.
Irresistible and immersive.
Wonderfully immersive.
Deeply immersive. And immersive.
Really immersive.
The immersive.
More immersive.
These immersive.
Immersive.
Immersive. Immersive.
Immersion.
Immersion.
Immersive.
Immersive.
Immersive. Immersive. Immersive.
It's been overused to the point where I don't think people really know what it means anymore. So let's talk about it. I'm going to be saying the word immersive a lot, so I better not see anyone telling me I'm saying it too much. Have you ever played a game where you felt like the choices you were making were more than just two paths laid out by a developer? You explored any new environment and scoured every inch because you were so invested in the world you stepped into, and every person, place, or thing you saw had you asking questions that you needed answers to, only to look up at the clock and realize it's been multiple hours. To put it simply,
gameplay that made me feel like Spider-Man.
Now that's immersion. Immersion can sometimes be confused with the rather loose term flow, which often means in the zone or locked in. The difference between the two is when I'm playing Counter-Strike and I hit a nasty flick, it doesn't mean I feel like I'm actually invested in the world of Counter-Strike, like I'm really there. I'm just in the zone and I hit that shot because I'm cracked, not because I was immersed. When you're immersed, you usually end up forgetting that you're playing a game at all. So why is it so important? Immersion is incredibly important when it comes to video games, as it allows for us to connect with the world we've been presented with, which not only makes the games more engaging, but it also ends up creating a more cohesive and rewarding gameplay loop outside of obtaining in-game rewards. Now, not every game needs to be immersive. Games that aren't focused on narrative, like Neon Abyss, aren't expecting you to be involved in the lore of the world in order for you to have a complete, satisfying gameplay experience. It's more important for games that are open world, RPGs, or narratively heavy experiences, like Tears of the Kingdom, Fallout, and The Last of Us. Now, whether or not a game is immersive is subjective, right? Surely if I feel immersed, the game is succeeding at being immersive. Well, not exactly. While the feeling of being immersed is an individual experience, the way a game goes about presenting its narrative, world building, and environment is not subjective. It's a clear way we can tell if a developer has done the work needed to create a world that is believable. If a game does not do a good job at weaving these things together, it can easily pull us out of being immersed while sullying our experience.
My secret stone. Secret stone. You are wearing. Secret stone.
Or have a feeling that what we are playing is heavily gamified. So the question is, when it comes to achieving immersion, many different aspects of a game have to work together to help the user suspend disbelief and feel engrossed in the world. What I won't be talking about, but is important, is narrative, aka the game's story. I think it's pretty self-explanatory that a good story easily ends up contributing to feeling more invested in the game. Now with that out of the way, let's break down every prominent contributing aspect, starting with how players obtain or receive items is often overlooked, but when creating a rich game world to explore, it is incredibly important. A good way would be finding certain items where you'd expect to find them, like an axe in a wood stump, a piece of food in a food stand, or bullets on a bandit that you just took down. It can be an easy way to let down a player if they're expecting to be rewarded by looking for an item where they think it is, only to find nothing over and over again. Another good way is if the game has a unique way of supplying an item, and that way is then expanded on through exposition. An example of this would be the introduction to whale oil in Dishonored. The game makes it a point to not only show you and explain to you what this item does, but it also gives the player an explanation lore-wise as to why it exists in the first place.
Oil's unstable. When it explodes, there's a terrible mess.
The energy in whale oil arises from the need to maintain life functions at extreme ocean depths.
If the devs had not taken this approach, it could have led to the players questioning what the item's origin was, leading to the game feeling like a game instead of an immersive experience. That reminds me, we should probably talk about for games that are aiming for the player to be invested, gameplay is an extremely critical component. Take Marvel's Spider-Man for example. While swinging through the city, you weave your way between buildings, through scaffolding, and over the heads of the citizens who live there. The player feels like they're making all these intricate moves, when realistically the game has something called swing steering assistance. It helps the player by deciding preset arcs and gently nudging the player's control outputs to create smoother transitions. This is not to say that a skilled player couldn't swing with the assist off, but it does help any player coming in to immediately feel like they're a superhero gliding through New York seamlessly. Now with that aside, I want to focus on talking about something called gameplay loop. Gameplay loop refers to the core game mechanics that make up a game's playthrough. For example, in Ratchet and Clank, you arrive on a new planet, maybe buy a new weapon, choose the explorable path, blast the shit out of anything you can see, collect bolts, and make it to the end. Now, while simple gameplay isn't bad, an overabundance of game mechanics doesn't always mean better when it comes to immersion. Having varied ways to tackle situations, engage in combat, and the world around you is a delicate balancing act when it comes to making a game fun. Witcher 3 is a good example of this. Now, while the core gameplay loop is go towards quest marker, NPC dialogue, investigate, fight, collect reward, and either continue to explore or go towards the main quest, it balances the back and forth by giving you variety. Variety in terms of combat, like different monsters and creatures requiring differing oils, potions, and signs to combat them, while the quests themselves vary from using your hunting skills to taking back overrun settlements, permanently showing the player's own contribution to the world they are interacting with, as the people who live there return to their homes and say their thanks to you.
Geralt, thanks for everything.
You're able to hear them say this because of a little thing called... When I refer to sound, I don't just mean the original soundtrack. I specifically mean sound. It's how the developers choose to use sound to help our subconscious feel no doubt in what we are experiencing. It's the same principle when we spot things in the uncanny valley. Our brains aren't consciously looking to see if things look correct, but our subconscious is able to tell very quickly when things are not looking correct. Well, the same thing works for sound. If we step on metal in a game, we expect to hear a metallic sound. When walking through grass, we expect to hear rustling. But sound extends past what we interact with as a player. Let's use BioShock for an example. We do hear our steps as we walk, but we also hear the creaking of the metal frames that are constantly under pressure being miles under the ocean. The slow dripping of small streams of water while the dilapidated vending machines in the distance echo through the decaying city. In adding all these little details of sound, our subconscious is being supplied with what it expects, leading to deeper immersion. The same can be said for the soundtrack of a game. Some games have looping soundtracks, which only change when entering different areas of the map. While others might opt for a dynamic soundtrack which changes depending on what's happening in the game. There is a third choice that I've noticed being used, and it's a lot less commonly discussed, that being ambient music. If the soundtrack and sound effects are two different layers, most of the time the soundtrack will take priority in what we are hearing. Ambient music flips this by having the sound effects at the forefront driving most of what we hear, while any soundtrack is used to enhance those effects instead of vice versa. I find structuring sound in this way leads the player to experiencing the world more in depth without making the game sound empty. Any soundtrack type can end up making a game immersive, but I do believe dynamic and ambient soundtracks end up having the most impact. Another really easy way to add more immersion to narrative games is with voice acting. Super simple, but it goes a long way in keeping the player's attention while having them become more enthralled in the emotion they are hearing from the actors.
You're about to. This is why we're here, you see.
Some games, though, take the route of having a silent protagonist, so the player can more easily feel like they are filling the spot of the main character. More commonly when this happens, we usually don't see the main character's face, to once again help with that illusion. There are cases like with Jack from the first Jak and Daxter, where we do see his face in all cutscenes, but in this game, Jack is actually explicitly mute. This fact is even commented on in-game by Daxter in the second game.
Maybe this guy's a mute, like you used to be.
It's another way of giving the players understandable explanations so our suspension of disbelief is not broken. Another factor that can contribute to our suspension of disbelief is something we're all familiar with, and that's Oftentimes, when developers lean into our real-world experiences, our overall intimacy with the world and its mechanics instinctively becomes easier to be invested in. For example, having the weather change, or if day changes to night, it becomes a very simple way to add a lot of depth, as we often find this in open-world games. Having these cycles breaks up the monotony and makes exploring even the same areas look and therefore feel different. But the reason it looks and feels different is because of how these systems change the game's lighting. This is a lot easier to explain when we focus on the games that take place primarily indoors, or in a setting with the absence of the outdoor elements. Lighting is more than just illuminating what we need to see. Depending on how light is used, it can drastically shift the tone of the environment we are in. More light usually equals safe. Less light, well, you get what I mean. Having flat lighting on everything can often take away from the game's immersiveness, because just like sound, our mind is expecting that information to be present. But this principle also extends to what color lights are being used, because different colors also help us determine tone. To talk about this, we have to discuss a bit of color theory. In general, it's often said that warm colors like red, orange, and yellow can feel more energetic and joyful, while cooler colors such as green, blue, and purple tend to be a calming or relaxing feeling. Now, while this often holds true as a general rule, it's not a perfect rule when it comes to talking about immersion, because while lighting is used to enhance settings, we have to also keep in mind what that setting is. For settings that are more grounded that players can easily relate to, the developers can rely on that by using color and lighting in ways that we expect. For example, when we see an industrial-looking red flashing light, we will immediately correlate it to a warning that something bad is happening. If a game has a setting that is more rooted in fantasy, a game can correlate colors to inform the player what is safe or not safe, like in the opening cutscene of Jak and Daxter, where the player is explicitly told not to touch this purple colored stuff or bad shit will happen.
And Daxter, you finally took a much-needed bath, but in a bathtub filled with dark eco.
If we are talking outside of color-related game systems, an example would be Subnautica. The safer areas are basked in a light blue tinge with more light in general, where the ocean floor is in full view, while areas that have more threats can vary between deep blues and green, where you can't see far in front or beneath you. That being said, I don't mean to say that realistic lighting makes the best lighting, because that is strictly not true. Having light that casts unrealistically is actually extremely common. We just don't notice it because light is often used to guide the player's attention towards places of interest or the path forward. Good developers will choose the position, spread, and colors of light to inform the player on how to feel about any given situation, either by showing them through gameplay or by subconsciously relating lit areas to places we are familiar with. Lighting is a powerful tool by itself, but it can do even more when combined with scripted events are segments of games that are specifically programmed to occur when the player reaches a certain milestone. This can include walking past something, interacting with an item, or even after a cutscene has finished. For example, in BioShock, after you first arrive in the underwater city of Rapture and take your first steps into the city's pressurized tunnels. Part of the plane you arrived on crashes into the hull of the tunnel, funneling water in as more water floods the hallway. The pressure bending and caving in the metal gates that protect you from the depths of the ocean, as scattered light fills the cramped area you navigate. Having these things take place while you're exploring really makes you feel like part of the world you're in. This is not to be confused with cinematic events, the difference being scripted events continue to let you move around and don't impede you playing the game, while cinematic events lock you into watching an event intentionally for the sake of the narrative. Both have their place when contributing to making a setting feel lived in, but it's the former that needs to be done properly to make it happen. Now, not all games have scripted events, and that doesn't mean that the game is inherently not immersive because of it, but it is a great way to add to a world and expand upon it. Now, while exploring any setting is fun, the world would be extremely empty without... Yes, you read that right. Non-playable characters, or NPCs, also play a role here. How NPCs interact and react to the player can be a big factor in being engaged in a game. If you're playing a game where the setting is more rugged and lawless, maybe pulling a weapon out around an NPC will cause them to cower in fear. Or if you walk up to them wearing little clothing, the character might cover their eyes. Those are examples of reactions from an NPC. But what about interacting? A good example will be in Breath of the Wild, where our main character Link wakes up with amnesia after being asleep for 100 years due to being injured from a great war. When he eventually runs into this guy, King Dorephan, He recognizes Link even though it's been 100 years, and since we learn from the story that Zora live incredibly long lives, this makes sense from an interaction standpoint. The same can be said with how normal Hylians, or non-Sheikah, have no idea who Link is because their lifespans are much shorter. There is one other aspect though when factoring immersion through NPCs, and that's when the player is not talking or approaching them at all. Things like hearing them talking can expand on world building and even give the players hints on what to do next.
I was just reading in the archive about the Heretic's brand. It sounds painful.
Who can say? The brand is reserved for an overseer, or even the High Overseer himself, who violates our codes and must be cast out permanently.
When an NPC just stands stagnant, doesn't move or blink, react or interact, we often get the feeling that the world we are experiencing doesn't have any life to it. Now I saved what I think is the most important factor when it comes to immersion last, and that's a good environment is more than just a setting the player navigates, and it plays just as important of a role in creating a compelling world as the narrative does, but I find it's something often overlooked when discussing immersion. Environmental storytelling is exactly what it sounds like, the environment assisting in telling a story. But how does it do this? If you ever heard the phrase, show, don't tell, well that's exactly it. The environment shows us things that gives us information that assist in creating narratively robust segments and or overall world building. Let me explain. How the player perceives the landscape can be a contributing factor, such as letting the player stumble upon geological landforms that are unique, like a crater or a mountain that's split in half. Basically anything that draws the player's attention to it, which is usually explained at some point in the game through context or lore. A good example would be if we are exploring and find ourselves in a forest and village that is completely burnt down. We sift through the wasteland before hearing the beating of heavy wings and hear an ear-erupting roar and see a dragon soaring towards us. Having the landscape do the work of explaining to us the situation, as opposed to an NPC just blankly telling us a dragon burnt down the village, leads to a more visceral and potent reaction from us as the player. Now, landscape works for more exterior places, but when that's not possible, the devs need to rely on the layout of their more enclosed sections to do the heavy lifting. Now, with more enclosed spaces, it's a lot easier to be more intentional with what the player is viewing due to the limitations on the player's exploration. This includes layouts like getting from point A to point B, where there isn't much delineation when it comes to the path forward, as well as instant explorable areas in which the player has a larger space to explore, but that space only opens up to them after completing a specific linear segment. With games that take this approach and do it well, they can use every inch of their explorable area to have something worth seeing. Dishonored does this a lot because the city of Dunwall has a ton of tight areas, some of which are mandatory to go through to proceed. The player will often see plague-ridden NPCs or bodies strewn across your path. Sometimes the bodies will be holding a note saying their last thoughts before they were overtaken by the rat plague that haunts the city. Now, while there are great instances of environmental storytelling, there aren't necessarily terrible instances as well. There are definitely games that don't have any in them due to the genre or style, and the ones that do will generally have something interesting to explore or see. Now that we are done with the how section, I'm going to go through some more in-depth examples in which I think succeed or do not succeed in their given category when it comes to immersion. In Dishonored, I find almost every item is placed where you think it should be. Sometimes you find extra darts stuck in a wall in an alley, as if a shootout took place. Other times you find tinned fish on a shelf in homes, or money in a guard's pouch. Even the more important items that you find, like bone charms, which are little occult items you wear to give the player added properties, are in unique places. Sometimes you find them tucked away in a more empty part of the map, and at one point you find a deceased NPC clutching it in their hands, while their written last words show they were on the brink of madness and eventually death, caused by the dark magic the item holds. I appreciate that not everything is just in the same textured looking chest for me to open and find an important item in. And I love how you can find a gang that's resorted to producing their own watered down health serum, not only for survival, but for profit, since they become so scarce due to the plague. Everything has a place, and that's what makes me love it so much more. Baldur's Gate 3 is an amazing game that I enjoyed thoroughly. Not only are there a ton of great sound effects and ambient sound, every single NPC you approach and are able to interact with has fully voiced dialogue. Isn't that incredible? Hundreds upon hundreds of characters fully voiced. It's just missing something. I can't quite put my finger on it. Oh yeah, your own player character is not fully voiced, and 95% of the time just stares at the NPC they are talking to during any dialogue.
Hello. You're about to.
It really takes me out of it, and I just can't get over the lack of voice acting. For a game that is so dialogue focused, in which they literally have every other character in the game fully voiced, it just boggles my mind. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is a game where you play as an assassin who also happens to be a pirate. You get a ship you can sail on as you go to different ports and islands in search of treasure or hunting wildlife, or just doing classic pirate stuff. One of the best parts of the game though is sailing. As you sail off into the ocean, you can hear the water splashing against the hull of the ship as you glide across the sea. The wind as it fills your sails and the creaking of the wood that makes up your vessel. But what ties it together is your crew, who will often break out into sea shanties. There's something calming about hearing all these things as you're charting the course at the helm. The rhythm of the shanties really pulls you in as if your crew is living and breathing. Witcher 3 is no stranger to looking absolutely stunning, but when it comes to day, night, and weather cycles and how they change in terms of light, it really goes beyond what I expect in an open world game. You can stay outside in one spot and wait from dawn until dusk and see the light cast shadows and change hue as the sun sets. Some areas of the game have specific weather while others go through a cycle. Having day, night, and weather cycles in a game that is aiming for realism is incredibly difficult to get right in terms of perception, but doing it right makes any place you go feel like a new adventure, regardless if you've been there before, and that's what makes its impact so noticeable. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was the flagship title for the PS5, and while it does look stunning, it runs into an interesting problem when it comes to lighting. The game tries to ride the line between being cartoony while also having the most realistic textures possible. But because of this, the visuals, especially the lighting, are extremely busy. You will often be walking along and all the metal flooring will catch and bounce light, making it quite hard to look at. Remember when I said lighting is often used to guide the player? Well, because of the direction the game took, they try to work around all the saturated colors and bright lights by overcompensating and making an even brighter light for you to look at instead. While impressive to see, it ends up feeling like an oversaturated eyesore where you can't quite tell what you need to be looking at, especially when you compare it to the original series. Dying Light 1 takes place in a quarantined city overrun with zombies. Nightfall hits as you're outside, and after a cutscene plays, you're contacted on the radio by an NPC you met earlier in the game. One of the few lines she mutters after contacting you is "the nightmares are awake." We then see our first sight of the volatiles, mutated zombies that only come out during the night, and as they spot you, you are given one objective: avoid volatiles and return to the tower. If it's your first time playing, there's no time to think or plan. All you have is your small flashlight as you hurtle your way through the claustrophobic streets as the volatiles and other zombies scream and chase after you. It is a terrifying experience, and one that I will never forget. Dying Light 2, on the other hand, has a scripted event that I won't forget for other reasons. You are in a new fictional city as you try to find your lost sister. Eventually you run into this guy named Waltz, who is the one standing between you and your goal. After this cutscene where Waltz almost chokes you out, he then begins to, and this is the best way I can describe it, more about like Jared Leto in Morbius. What ensues is a long, annoying, completely linear, and absolutely mandatory chase segment where you sluggishly parkour your way through decaying buildings as the NPC in front of you closes the door behind her in front of your face multiple times. It is not only incredibly boring, but also so lackluster and annoying. In Witcher 3, when you finally get to the city of Novigrad, it's sprawling and full of life, and I don't just mean in terms of how many NPCs there are. It's how the NPCs act throughout the city that is such a treat. You can find NPCs playing music, talking to one another, doing chores as the guards patrol, and so much more. There's always someone to look at while navigating the at times crowded streets, and it really feels like the city is alive. It feels like the standard for how NPCs should interact with the world around them. You might be thinking, wow, he mostly only had positive examples. That's because I've been waiting for this very moment. It's time for the Tears of the Kingdom Immersion Gauntlet. Spoilers ahead. Tears of the Kingdom's gameplay is centered around using these things called zonai devices to construct vehicles or anything the player wants to make. The most common way to get these items is to put an item currency called zonite into these machines. Now, why do these ancient machines hovering in the sky resemble and act like gachapon machines you'd see in Japan? Don't ask me, because it's not like the game ever makes an attempt to explain why there's a fucking gachapon machine that gives you balls full of ancient devices. It's giving me balls? This is balls! Why does this exist? In what functioning society would anyone need a machine that spits out an assortment of items that you don't directly get to choose the amount of? I'd give it a pass if it was at least explained as to why this shit behaves and looks like this, but come on. Tears of the Kingdom fans will try and justify anything, and wait a minute. Did you see that? Oh my god. This must be a lore clue that Big Wheel is coming to Marvel Rival! The game was also marketed as a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, and as you can imagine, there are some named NPCs that exist in both games. For example, in Breath of the Wild, you meet this guy named Bolson, who owns a construction company. He has some employees, one in particular named Hudson. You basically go on a side quest where you bring Bolson items and money, and in exchange, he fixes up your own house that you can live in. In a later quest, the player is invited to Hudson's wedding, in which Bolson is also there, because you know, that's his boss and friend. In Tears of the Kingdom, Hudson remembers us, but Bolson acts like it's the first time he's ever met you. Are you beginning to see why that's a problem? It doesn't make any sense narratively because the devs basically had a brain blast to figure out which NPCs they wanted to have retained their brain from the previous game so it wouldn't alienate new players even though it's a sequel. I know I wasn't going to talk about anything narrative, but I can't help myself. Tears of the Kingdom takes the approach of telling its story through these tiers scattered throughout the world where you need to approach and interact with them to view it. At the beginning of the game, Zelda disappears and we have no idea where she went. These tiers tell a linear story of Zelda who was sent to the past, and the final tier shows Zelda turning into the Light Dragon so she can charge the Master Sword and give it to Link in the future. Neat idea, except for the fact that besides the final tier, you can view any of them out of order. They also aren't mandatory to beat the game. So there's two scenarios that are most likely to happen in a playthrough. One, you go to find the tiers and spoil yourself for the linear story it's trying to tell, or two, you don't view any tiers because it's not mandatory, and once you beat the final boss, you see this Light Dragon turn into Zelda, and you are incredibly lost. Who thought this would be a good idea? Unless you actively look up the viewing order of the tiers, you will 100% get spoiled by the game itself, or feel like you have no idea what's going on in the story because the story isn't even enforced. The main quest that does try to give some narrative is copy and paste it after you beat each region's dungeons. Why am I being given the same info 4 times?
Demon King. Secret Stone.
Stop telling me about the Demon King and the Secret Stones and actually make a proper narrative! Now that I got that out of my system, if you like Tears of the Kingdom, that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to tell you that it's a bad game. None of the games I listed are bad just because of missed opportunities for immersion. Hell, Baldur's Gate 3 won Game of the Year. With the increasing price of games, I think it's more important than ever to not let game developers, especially AAA developers, get away with putting in less effort into their games. But at the end of the day, games are meant to be enjoyed, and if you enjoy a game and feel immersed by it, then the developers have succeeded. All game devs should strive to make the best worlds and experiences possible, and if immersion is a needed component in making their game complete, then they should at least do the work to make it happen. I want to love any game I play, that's why I play and make games in the first place, but what I think in the end doesn't really matter. Actually, you know what? Only my opinion matters, and I will say what the most immersive game is. You already know what it is. It's an older game where you play as a character whose main trait is his stealth and looks super cool. Say it with me, the most immersive game of all time is Spy Fox. There's nothing more immersive than using fucking toothpaste and a toothbrush to open a metal door. I'm tilted just thinking about it. No way. Are you serious? This is why I've been stuck on this entire time. I need to use the fucking toothbrush on the steel door. Oh my god! This game. I'm not thinking like a Spy Fox player. I'm thinking like I'm thinking that's the problem.
Now that's a big side of beef. No buts about it.